The space station floated above a distant star. It was huge, bigger than any city on Earth. Lights glowed from thousands of windows. Ships came and went like insects around a lamp. This was the Galactic Academy, where young aliens from 47 different worlds came to learn. Stood at the window of his new quarters and watched the stars. He was human, one of only 3 humans on the entire station. His species had joined the Galactic Confederation just 5 years ago. Everything still felt strange and new. "First day jitters," a voice asked behind him. He turned, stood in the doorway, smiling. She was human too, a specialist in alien psychology. She had been at the academy for 2 years already. "A little," admitted. "I've taught for 15 years back on Earth, but this is different." "Very different," agreed. She walked to the window and stood beside him. "Remember what I told you in our messages. Don't expect things to work like they did at home." Nodded. He had read all the files. He knew about the different species, their cultures, their ways of learning. But reading about something and experiencing it were 2 different things. "The worry me the most," he said quietly. Smile faded a bit. "Yes, they're complicated. Their cubs are aggressive by nature. It's biological. During their teenage years, their hormones make them challenge everything and everyone. It's normal for them. And the teachers just accept it. The teachers respond with their own displays of dominance. It's their way. They roar back, bare their teeth, show who's stronger. It establishes order in their culture." Frowned. "That sounds exhausting." "It is," said. "The other species students get scared. Sometimes they stop coming to classes with cubs. It's been a problem for decades, but nobody wants to challenge their cultural practices." A chime sounded. His communication device blinked. "That's your first class," said. "Good luck. And just observe today, don't try to change anything yet. Learn how things work first." He nodded and grabbed his data pad. His first class was multi-species ethics, co-taught with an instructor named. He had seen her file. She had 40 years of teaching experience and came from a noble family on the. The classroom was large and circular. Seats were adjusted for different body types. There were pods for the water-breathing students. There were heated stones for the cold-blooded. There were normal chairs for species like humans and. Arrived early. The room was empty except for. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, covered in golden fur with darker stripes. Her eyes were amber and sharp. She looked like a lioness that had learned to stand on 2 legs. "Instructor," she said. Her voice was deep and rumbling. "Welcome. You will observe today and assist with the data screens." "Thank you," instructor said, bowing slightly. He had learned that respected formality. Students began to arrive. First came a group of small, blue-skinned. They chirped to each other in high voices and took seats in the back. Then came 2, walking slowly on their 4 legs. A floating drifted in, its transparent body shimmering. Then the cubs arrived. There were 5 of them. They were smaller than but still large, each about 6 feet tall. Their fur was various shades of brown and gold. They walked with confidence, almost swagger. Their claws clicked on the floor. One cub stood out. His fur was darker than the others with black streaks. His eyes were intense. He walked ahead of the group and the others followed. This was Al, had seen his file too. Noble family, high intelligence, history of aggressive behavior. The cubs took seats in the center of the room. The other species students kept their distance. Began the lesson. She spoke about resource distribution in multi-species colonies, how to share food, water, and living space fairly. Her voice was clear and strong. Operated the data screens showing images and charts. He watched the students. The took notes eagerly. The listened with slow, careful attention. The pulsed different colors which had learned meant it was thinking. The cubs looked bored. Al yawned widely, showing sharp teeth. He stretched his arms. He tapped his claws on the desk, making clicking sounds, ignored him and continued teaching. When resources are limited, said, fairness must be established through negotiation. Each species has different needs. The need water, the need heat, the need. Why should the strong negotiate with the weak? Al interrupted. His voice was loud and sharp. Stopped, she turned to look at him. Because we are not animals, Al. We are civilized beings. Civilization is just a word the weak invented to protect themselves, Al said. He stood up from his seat. In nature, the strong take what they need. That is honest. That is real. The other students shifted nervously. The in the back looked at each other with wide eyes. One of them started moving toward the door. His eyes narrowed. Sit down, Cub. Make me, Al said. The room went silent. This was a direct challenge. Felt his heart beat faster. He glanced at her, muscles tensed under her fur. Al took a step toward, then another. He was young, but he was large and strong. His claws extended slightly, and then he growled. It was a deep, rumbling sound that came from his chest. It filled the room. It was a sound designed by millions of years of evolution to trigger fear. The squeaked and huddled together. The colors flashed in alarm. Drew herself up to her full height. Her fur stood on end, making her look even larger. She bared her teeth. She began to growl back, even deeper and louder than Al. This was the way. The elder proves their dominance. The young one submits or fights. Either way, the hierarchy is established. Watched, his hands gripped the edge of the control panel. This was their culture. This was their method. Had told him not to interfere. But he also saw the trembling. He saw one of them leaving the room entirely. He saw the other cubs watching with excited eyes, eager to see violence. This was learning. Al's growl grew louder. He took another step forward, matched him, her own growl shaking the air. They were 6 feet apart now, then 5, their eyes locked. The confrontation was building to its peak. Soon one would lunge. There would be a physical clash. Al would be pinned or thrown. He would submit or be hurt. And tomorrow it would happen again with another cub, and the day after that, and the day after that. Thought of his students back on Earth, teenagers full of energy and defiance. He had dealt with challenging students before, but never like this, never with violence. He thought of his niece, just 10 years old. If she challenged a teacher, what would happen? A talk, an explanation, maybe detention, but never this, never fear and dominance and growling. The moment stretched out, and Al circled each other slightly. The other students pressed back against the walls and realized something. Had told him not to interfere. The regulations said to respect cultural practices. But no regulation, no rule, no cultural tradition would make him stand by and watch students be terrorized. He was human, and humans had their own way of dealing with challenging young people. He took a breath and prepared himself for what he was about to do. Stepped forward. His footsteps were quiet compared to the growling that filled the room. He moved between and Al, not rushing, not aggressive, just walking. Both stopped their growling. They stared at him in confusion. The small human had entered their confrontation space. This was not normal. This was not expected. Looked directly at Al. He did not raise his voice. He did not make himself bigger. He simply spoke in a calm, clear tone. Al, say sorry. The words hung in the air, 6 syllables in Galactic Standard, simple, direct, undeniable. Al's mouth opened slightly. He looked genuinely confused. His amber eyes blinked. What? You interrupted the instructor, said, still in that same calm voice. You were rude, say sorry. The room was silent now. No growling. No movement. Every student stared at the human who had just done the impossible. He had stepped into a dominance challenge and changed it into something else entirely. Stood frozen, her growl dying in her throat. Her fur slowly settled back down. She looked at with an expression that mixed surprise, confusion, and something that might have been curiosity. Al's claws were still extended. His muscles were still tense for a fight, But there was no fight happening. The human was not challenging him. There was no aggression to respond to, no dominance display to counter. "I do not apologize to instructors," Al said, but his voice was less certain now. "That is not our way." "It is my way," said quietly. "And you are in a galactic academy, not just a school. You will learn many ways here. This is one of them." In the observation room above the classroom, watched through the screens, she was the third human at the academy, a cultural liaison officer. Her job was to help humans understand alien cultures and help aliens understand humans. Right now, she was gripping the edge of her console, hardly breathing. "He's going to cause an incident," she whispered to herself, "is going to kill him." But she did not press the emergency button. Something made her wait and watch. Back in the classroom, Al was struggling. His entire biology screamed at him to fight this challenge. But what challenge? The human was not showing dominance. He was not trying to prove he was stronger. He was just asking for something. "What if I refuse?" Al asked. Tilted his head slightly. "Then you prove that you are weak." Al's fur bristled. "I am not weak. I am stronger than you, human." "Physically, yes, probably," agreed easily. "You could hurt me if you wanted. Your claws are sharp. Your muscles are strong. I know this." He took a small step closer, not threatening, just closing the distance like someone having a conversation. "But strength is not just physical, Al. In my species, real strength is being brave enough to admit when you are wrong. That takes more courage than any fight." The cub stared at him. This did not match anything in his understanding of the universe. Apologizing was for the weak. Everyone knew that. It meant you were subordinate. It meant you had lost. "Among my people," continued, "we teach our young ones a saying. It takes a small person to make mistakes. It takes a big person to admit them. You are young, yes. But are you big enough to say two simple words?" The other cubs watched Al carefully. They were confused too. Their culture had rules, clear rules, dominant and submissive, strong and weak, winner and loser. But this human was creating a third option, something that did not fit into their categories. Had not moved. She was processing what was happening. In 40 years of teaching, she had faced hundreds of challenges from cubs. She had won every confrontation through superior strength and experience. But she had never, not once, received an apology from a student. The idea seemed foreign, strange, almost impossible. Extended his hand to Al, not to strike, not to grab, just offering, palm up, an invitation, not a demand. "Try it," he said softly, "just this once. Say sorry to instructor, see what happens." Al looked at the hand, he looked its face. The human's eyes were steady and calm. There was no anger in them, no fear either, just patience, just waiting. Something shifted in Al's chest. It was uncomfortable. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, not knowing if the ground would hold. His claws slowly retracted. The tension in his muscles began to ease. His mouth felt dry. The words were difficult to form. They tasted strange on his tongue. He started. His voice was much quieter now. "I apologize, instructor." The words were barely audible, but in the silent classroom everyone heard them. For a long moment nothing happened, then smiled. It was a warm smile, approving. "Good," he said simply. "That was brave, Al, thank you." Brave, the word echoed in Al's mind. He had just apologized. He had shown weakness. Hadn't he? But the human called it brave. The human looked at him with respect, not contempt. Al felt confused. He felt strange. But he also felt something else, something lighter, as if a weight he did not know he was carrying had lifted slightly. Found her voice. "Back to your seat, Al," she said. Her tone was different now, less harsh, more thoughtful. The cub walked back to his desk. His movements were slower, less aggressive. He sat down and stared at his hands, at his retracted claws. The other students slowly relaxed. The stopped trembling. The who had left peeked back through the door, wondering if it was safe. Returned to the control panel. He nodded too. My apologies, instructor. I should have asked permission before speaking. That was disrespectful of me. And there it was again. The human was apologizing to the instructor in front of all the students, showing that apologies could flow in any direction, even from instructor to instructor. His ears twitched. She did not know how to respond, so she simply nodded and returned to the lesson. But her mind was racing. What had just happened? The human had stopped a traditional dominance display with just words, quiet words, and somehow it had worked. Al had backed down without being beaten, without being shamed. In fact, the human had praised him. This was not how things worked. This was not natural, and yet it had happened. The lesson continued, but it was different now. Al did not interrupt again. The other cubs were quieter, more thoughtful. The non-students paid attention instead of cowering. When class ended, the students filed out. Al walked slowly, his head down, still thinking. The other cubs looked at him strangely, whispering to each other. Stood beside as the room emptied. What you did was highly irregular, she said finally. I know, replied. I apologize if I overstepped. There was that word again, apologize. His tail swished behind her. You understand that you may have created a problem. The other instructors will hear about this. The administration will want answers. I understand. And yet you did it anyway. Yes. Studied the human. He was so small compared to her. Fragile. She could break him easily if she wanted. But there was something in his eyes, something solid and unmoving, that made her reconsider what strength really meant. I need to think about what happened today, she said quietly. Of course, said, take all the time you need. As left the classroom, sat down in one of the chairs. His hands were shaking slightly. Adrenaline. He had been afraid during the confrontation, more afraid than he had shown. But fear did not mean you did nothing. It meant you did the right thing despite being afraid. His communication device chimed. The message was short, my office now. Smiled ruefully. He had expected this. He stood up and headed for what he knew would be a difficult conversation. But he would do it again, every time, because some things were more important than following rules. Some things were more important than not making waves. Teaching was one of those things. His office was small and filled with data pads and screens. Images of different alien species covered the walls. Brain scans, behavioral charts, cultural maps. She stood by the window when entered, her arms crossed. Close the door, she said without turning around. He stood quietly waiting. Do you have any idea what you just did? Asked. Her voice was tight with controlled frustration. I stopped a confrontation that was scaring the other students, said calmly. You interfered with a cultural practice that has existed for thousands of years. Turned to face him. Her eyes were worried, not angry. They have specific protocols. You ignored all of them. I did. And you are not sorry. No, said, I am not. Sighed and sat down at her desk. She rubbed her temples. I like you. You are a good teacher, but humanity is still new to the Confederation. We are on probation. We have to be careful. We cannot just impose our values on other species. I did not impose anything, said. I asked a student to apologize for being rude. That is basic classroom management. Not in culture. But we are not teaching only cubs, countered. There were students terrified in the back of the room. There was a who left entirely. Is their education less important than maintaining traditions? Opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. She looked down at her desk. The academy is supposed to be for all species, continued more gently. But if one species' cultural practices make it impossible for others to learn, what are we really teaching? Before could answer, her communication device blinked. She glanced at it and her expression changed. The high instructor wants to see us both, right now. They walked through the curved corridors of the station in silence. Other instructors and students passed them, various species going about their day. Some stared at. Word was already spreading. The high instructor's office was large and filled with natural light from tall windows. High instructor was an avian, tall and covered in blue-green feathers. His eyes were sharp and intelligent. He gestured to seats with one wing arm. Instructor specialist, please sit. They sat. Noticed that was also there, standing to one side. Her expression was unreadable. His crest feathers rose slightly, a sign of deep thought. I have reviewed the classroom recording. What you did today, instructor, was highly unusual. Yes, sir, said. You understand that many species have different approaches to education. The Confederation respects these differences. I understand, sir. His head tilted. And yet you intervened in a traditional teaching moment. Why? Chose his words carefully. With respect, sir, I saw students from other species being frightened away from education. The Academy's mission is to teach all species to work together, but they cannot learn together if some are too scared to stay in the classroom. The method has been used here for many years, said. And has it worked? Asked. How many non-students drop out of classes with cubs? How many choose not to take certain subjects because they are afraid? His feathers ruffled. He looked at. Instructor, you were there. What is your perspective? Stepped forward. Her tail swished slowly behind her. The human's action was unexpected and effective. Al has never apologized before. None of my cubs have. I did not think it was possible. And do you feel he disrespected your authority? Asked. Was quiet for a long moment. He apologized to me afterward in front of the students. He showed that apologies can go in any direction, that even instructors can admit when they overstep. She paused. I have never done that. I have never considered it. Shifted in her seat, surprised. She had expected to demand punishment. Stood and walked to the window. He looked out at the stars. This academy was created to bridge the gaps between species, to teach young beings from different worlds how to understand each other. But perhaps we have focused too much on maintaining traditions and not enough on actual understanding. He turned back to them. Instructor, I am not punishing you, but I am also not giving you permission to continue as you did. This requires more thought, more discussion. I understand, sir, said. However, continued, I am interested in your human methods. How do your species handle difficult students without physical dominance? Glanced at who nodded slightly, permission to explain. On Earth, we believe that young people need to learn accountability, began. When they make mistakes, we do not beat them into submission. We teach them to understand why their actions were wrong. We teach them to take responsibility. We teach them empathy. Empathy? Asked, what is this? Spoke up, understanding how others feel, putting yourself in another person's position. It is a core value in human development. And you teach this to your young? Asked. From a very early age, confirmed. We teach them that their actions affect others, that saying sorry is not weakness but strength. It shows you understand you made a mistake and want to do better. His ears flattened slightly. In our culture, admitting fault is subordination. It shows the other is dominant. In our culture, admitting fault is growth, said. It shows you are strong enough to be honest with yourself, that you care more about being right than appearing right. The room was quiet. These were new ideas for most species. Humans had only been in the Confederation for 5 years. Their psychology was still largely unknown. His crest feathers rose higher. This is fascinating, and you believe this could work with students from other species. I believe it is worth trying, said carefully. Obviously, we must adapt to different cultures, but the basic idea, teaching young beings to take responsibility for their actions with compassion, this is universal. Compassion, said the word slowly, as if testing it. We do not use this word much in our education. Maybe that is something to consider, suggested gently. paced slowly, his talons clicking on the floor. "Here is what I propose. Instructor, you will develop a program. A demonstration of these human methods adapted for multiple species. Specialist will assist with the psychological aspects. Cultural liaison will help adapt the methods for different species." He looked at, "And I would like you to participate, instructor. Observe these methods. Compare them to your own. Give us your honest assessment." His tail stopped swishing. She looked at, then at, "You want me to learn from the human?" "I want you to learn with the human," corrected. "This is the purpose of the academy. We all learn from each other." After a long pause, bowed her head. "I will participate." "Excellent," said. "You have 1 month to develop the program. Then we will implement it with a small test group of students. If it works, we will consider expanding it." Felt relief wash through him. He had expected punishment, possibly even dismissal. Instead, he was being given a chance to prove his methods. "Thank you, High Instructor," he said. "Do not thank me yet," said with what might have been a smile. "You will have much work to do, and many instructors will resist. Change is never easy, even when it is necessary." The meeting ended. As they left the office, walked beside. "I do not understand your methods," she said quietly, "but I respect that you were brave enough to act on your beliefs. That is something I can understand." Smiled, "That is all I ask, a chance to show there might be a different way." Nodded slowly, "We will see, human, we will see." Later that evening, met with and in his quarters. They sat around a small table, data pads spread out before them. "This is going to be hard," said. She was younger than the other 2 humans, enthusiastic but worried. Some species do not even have a word for apology in their language. "Then we will teach them one," said. "Or we will find another way to express the same concept, taking responsibility, making amends, showing you care about how your actions affect others. The families might withdraw their cubs," warned. "They will see this as corrupting their culture." Some might, agreed. But did you see Al's face after he apologized? He looked confused, yes, but also lighter somehow, like he had put down a heavy burden. Nodded slowly. "I saw it too, that was unexpected." They worked late into the night, planning and discussing. They knew this would not be easy. They were 3 humans trying to change educational practices that were thousands of years old. But they also knew it was worth trying, because in that classroom, for just a few minutes, something had changed. A young cub had learned that strength could mean something different than he had always been taught. And that was just the beginning. The next few weeks were busy, and worked on the new program every evening after classes. They called it the Accountability and Compassion Initiative, though joked they should call it Teaching Cubs to Say Sorry. The first challenge was language. Many species did not have direct translations for human concepts like empathy, accountability, or restorative justice. They had to create new teaching methods that could work across different ways of thinking. "They have a concept of balance," explained one evening, pointing at her research. "When one wrongs another, they must perform an act of equal value to restore balance. It is not exactly an apology, but it serves the same function." In the asked, "They share emotions through color changes," said. "When they hurt another, they show remorse through specific color patterns. It is like apologizing without words." Nodded. "So we are not teaching all species to be like humans. We are teaching them the idea behind the apology, taking responsibility, making things right." "Exactly," agreed. Meanwhile, word of the incident in his classroom had spread throughout the academy. Reactions were mixed. Some instructors were curious. They had seen their own students struggle with the aggressive teaching style. They wanted to know if there was a better way. Other instructors were angry. They saw the humans' interference as arrogant. Who were humans, such a new species to the Confederation, to tell others how to teach? The strongest reaction came from the community. Several families sent formal complaints to the academy administration. They said the human was corrupting their cubs, teaching them weakness, destroying their cultural values. One family their cub entirely, taking him back to the. They said they would not allow their son to be softened by human ideas. But not all felt this way. One afternoon came to his office. She stood in the doorway, her large frame filling the space. "May I come in?" she asked. "Of course," said, gesturing to a reinforced chair designed for larger species. Sat down carefully. She was quiet for a moment, her tail curled around her feet. "I have been thinking about what happened in my classroom," she said finally. "Yes. I have taught for 40 years. I have faced hundreds of challenges from cubs. I always won. I always proved my dominance. The cubs learned to respect my strength." She paused. "But I am not sure they learned to respect me." Waited. He had learned that sometimes the best thing to do was simply listen. "After Al apologized, I watched him," continued. "He was confused, but he was also thinking, really thinking, not just reacting, not just following instinct." She looked at. "In 40 years, I have never seen a cub think so deeply after a confrontation." "What did he do?" asked. "He came to my office the next day. He asked if he could apologize again, properly this time. He said the first apology was hard because he did not understand it, but now he understood. He had been rude. He had disrupted learning for other students. He wanted to make it right." Felt a warmth in his chest. "What did you say?" "I did not know what to say," admitted. "So I accepted his apology, and then," she hesitated, "I apologized to him." "You did?" "I apologized for only teaching him one way of being strong, for never showing him that strength could mean something other than dominance." His ears flattened. "It was the hardest thing I have ever said, harder than any fight I have won." "But you said it," said quietly. "Yes, and do you know what happened?" Leaned forward. He thanked me, as if I had given him a gift, and perhaps I had. Perhaps we had both given each other something." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "I want to learn these methods," said. "Not to replace our culture, but to add to it, to give our cubs more tools, more ways of being strong." "I would be honored to work with you," said. Over the following weeks, they developed the program together, helped adapt the concepts for psychology, created psychological frameworks, translated everything into terms different species could understand. They created scenarios where students would practice taking responsibility, role-playing exercises, discussions about how actions affect others, methods for resolving conflicts without violence or dominance displays. The test group was small, 10 students from 5 different species, 2 cubs including Al, 3, 2, 1 avian, 1 human student who had recently arrived. The first session was awkward. The students did not understand what was expected of them. The cubs kept waiting for a dominance challenge that never came. They were too nervous to speak. They moved slowly and carefully, unsure of this new dynamic. But was patient. He started with simple exercises. "Everyone has made a mistake," he said. "Even me, even instructor, let me start. Yesterday I was late to a meeting with cultural liaison. I did not message her to tell her I would be late. She waited for 20 minutes. That was disrespectful of her time." The students listened, confused. Why was the instructor admitting a mistake? "So I apologized too," continued. "I told her I was sorry for being late. I explained what happened. I was helping another student and lost track of time, and I promised to message her next time if I will be late." He looked at the students. That is accountability, admitting when you are wrong, explaining what happened, and trying to do better next time. "But you are an instructor," one of them squeaked. "You do not have to apologize to anyone." "Why not?" asked. "I am not perfect. I make mistakes. And when I make mistakes that affect others, they deserve to know I care about how my actions affected them." This was revolutionary to many of the students. In their cultures, higher-ranked beings did not apologize to lower-ranked ones. It showed weakness, loss of status. "Now I want each of you to think of a time you made a mistake," said. "You do not have to share it if you do not want to, just think about it. What happened? Who was affected? How did you feel?" Al raised his hand. Everyone turned to look at him. "I make mistakes every day," he said. His voice was uncertain but honest. "But I never thought about who was affected. I only thought about whether I got in trouble." "That is very honest," Al said. "Thank you for sharing that." Slowly, other students began to open up. The pulsed colors that indicated sadness as it shared about accidentally damaging another student's project. One of them talked about lying to a friend. The avian student discussed spreading gossip that hurt someone's feelings. For each story asked the same questions. Who was affected? How did they likely feel? What could you do to make it right? It was simple, almost too simple, but it worked. By the third session, students were starting to apologize to each other without being prompted. They showed its remorse colors to the student whose project it had damaged and offered to help fix it. The who had lied to their friend spoke to them honestly. The avian student apologized to the person they had gossiped about. The cubs were the slowest to change. Their biology still pushed them toward aggression and dominance, but even they began to see the value. During one session, Al accidentally knocked over a smaller student in the hallway. It was an accident, but the fell hard. Old Al would have kept walking. It was this fault for being in the way. The weak should be more careful. But new Al stopped. He looked at the on the floor. He thought about what had been teaching. He extended his paw to help the up. "I am sorry," he said. "I was not paying attention. Are you hurt?" They stared at the paw in shock. A cub was apologizing and offering help. This was unheard of. Slowly they took Al's paw and was pulled to their feet. I'm okay, thank you." Other students in the hallway had stopped to watch. Word of this interaction spread quickly. The aggressive cub who had challenged instructor was now helping students he had knocked down and apologizing. Some students thought he had been broken, made weak, but others saw something different. They saw a young who was strong enough to be kind. Not everyone was happy with the changes. Some families were furious. They demanded the program be shut down. They said their cubs were being taught to be weak and submissive. A delegation of parents came to meet with High Instructor. They stood in his office, angry and demanding. "Our cubs are being corrupted," one father growled. "They are learning to bow and scrape. This is not the way." Listened patiently, then he asked a question. "Are your cubs learning?" The father paused. "What? Are they learning the subjects we teach here? Mathematics, science, diplomacy, xenobiology?" "Well, yes, but are non-students staying in classes with your cubs now instead of leaving?" Another pause. "I suppose so." "Then the program is working," said simply. "Your cubs are still strong. They are still proud. They are still, but now they are also learning to exist in a multi-species society. That is what this academy is for." The parents left, unsatisfied but unable to argue with the results. 1 month after the program started, stood in the observation room with Ann. They watched the test group below working together on a project. Cubs worked beside students. The floated between them, helping coordinate. The moved carefully, considerate of the smaller species. "It is working," whispered. "I cannot believe it, but it is actually working." Smiled. Never underestimate the power of teaching empathy. Said nothing. He just watched and felt proud, not proud of himself but proud of the students. They were learning, growing, becoming better than what their instincts told them to be. That was education. That was real teaching. 6 months had passed since first asked Al to say sorry. The test program had been so successful that High Instructor decided to expand it across the entire academy. Not all instructors agreed to participate. Some still believed in the old ways, in cultural traditions that should not be changed. But many instructors, seeing the positive results, wanted to learn the new methods and spent their days training other teachers. They showed them how to teach accountability, how to create safe spaces for students to admit mistakes, how to build empathy across species barriers. Became one of their strongest advocates. She taught other instructors how to maintain their cultural strength while also embracing compassion. It was not easy for them. Many resisted, but was respected, and her words carried weight. "I am not saying our way was wrong," she told a group of skeptical teachers. "I am saying our way was incomplete. We taught our cubs to be strong. Now we teach them to be strong and wise. Strength without wisdom is just violence." The changes were visible throughout the academy. Hallways were quieter. There were fewer dominance displays, fewer frightened students rushing to avoid aggressive encounters. The medical bay reported fewer injuries from student conflicts. Academic performance improved across all species. Students who had been too afraid to participate in class now raised their hands and asked questions. Group projects that had always failed because species could not work together now succeeded. But the most significant change was in the students themselves. Al was almost unrecognizable from the aggressive cub who had challenged 6 months ago. He still had the same physical strength, the same sharp claws and teeth, but he used them differently now. One day saw him in the library. A small student was struggling to reach a data pad on a high shelf. Al walked over, tall enough to reach it easily. "May I help?" he asked. The looked nervous but nodded. Al gently took down the data pad and handed it to her. "Thank you," the squeaked. "You are welcome," Al said, then he paused. "I am sorry if I scared you. I know I used to be aggressive. I am trying to be better." The eyes widened. "You did scare me before, but you are different now. Thank you for changing." Al nodded and walked away. He did not see watching from the doorway, a small smile on the human's face. Not all changes were so smooth. There were setbacks. One afternoon, a fight broke out between two cubs in the recreation area. They had reverted to old behaviors, snarling and clawing at each other over a dispute about game rules. Other students scattered in fear. Instructors rushed to separate them. It took 3 teachers to pull the two cubs apart. Later, both cubs sat in his office, sullen and angry. Their fur was ruffled, their ears flat against their heads. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" asked calmly. Neither cub spoke. "Let me guess," continued. "You disagreed about something. Instead of talking about it, you let your anger take over. You fought. And now you are both in trouble and the problem is still not solved." One of the cubs growled softly. "He cheated." "I did not cheat," the other cub snapped back. "You just cannot accept losing." "See," said, "you are still fighting. How is that helping?" Both cubs fell silent. "You both know better," said. "You have both been in the accountability program. You have both learned these tools. But learning and using are different things. Old habits are hard to break, especially when you are angry." He leaned forward. "Here is what we are going to do. You are each going to tell me your side of the story. Not yelling, not interrupting, just explaining. Then you are each going to tell me how the other person probably felt. Then you are going to find a solution together. Can you do that?" It took an hour. There were several moments when the cubs started to get aggressive again, but guided them back to calm discussion each time. Slowly, painfully, they worked through the conflict. In the end, they both apologized. One for cheating, he admitted it when really pushed to be honest. The other for attacking instead of talking. They agreed on new rules for the game so no one could cheat. They shook paws awkwardly. "That was hard," one cub said as they left. "Yes," agreed. "But it was worth it, was it not? You solved the problem. You are not enemies anymore. That would not have happened if you just kept fighting." The cubs nodded and left together. Not friends yet, but not enemies either. As word of the Academy's success spread, other educational institutions across the Confederation became interested. Delegations from different worlds visited to observe the new teaching methods. A group of avian educators came and spent a week watching classes. They were impressed by how species worked together, how conflicts were resolved peacefully. On our world, we separate species in schools, their leader explained to. We thought it was safer, but perhaps we were wrong. Perhaps they need to learn together. Administrators visited and noted the drop in student injuries. Our cubs are slow and careful by nature, one said, but the aggressive species still hurt them sometimes. Your methods might protect them better than separation. Even some educational leaders came, though they were more skeptical. They watched teach a class where she guided cubs through a conflict resolution exercise. They saw Al help a smaller student with a difficult assignment. One older educator shook his head. This is not how we do things on the. No, agreed. But our cubs do not live only on the anymore. They live in a galaxy with 46 other species. They need skills for that reality. The educator had no response to that. One evening, 6 months after the program's expansion, a ceremony was held in the Academy's main plaza. High Instructor stood before a gathered crowd of students, teachers, and visiting dignitaries. Today we dedicate a new monument, he announced. It represents the values we have embraced here at the Academy, values that one human instructor showed us 6 months ago. Workers unveiled a tall sculpture. It showed a figure, humanoid but purposely made to not represent any specific species. The figure had one hand extended, not in a fist or a gesture of dominance but palm up, offering, inviting. This monument reminds us that strength comes in many forms, continued. Physical strength, mental strength, but also moral strength. The strength to admit when we are wrong, the strength to apologize, the strength to show compassion. A plaque at the base had writing in 47 languages. It read, "Strength without compassion is tyranny. Compassion without accountability is chaos." Here, we learn both. Students from all species stood together in the plaza. Cubs stood next to, avians next to humans, all different, all learning together. Al stood at the front of the student group. His younger brother had just arrived at the Academy that week, nervous and uncertain. "What is that?" his brother asked, pointing at the monument. "It is a reminder," Al said, "of what really makes someone strong." "You sound different than you used to," his brother observed. "In your messages home, you talked about fighting and dominance. Now you talk about compassion and accountability." "I learned better," Al said simply. "I learned from a human teacher who was brave enough to tell me to say sorry." "And did you say sorry?" "Yes, it was the hardest thing I ever did, and the most important." His brother looked at him with new eyes. "I want to learn these things too." "You will," Al promised. "We all do here." After the ceremony, stood with and watching students mingle in the plaza. Different species talking, laughing, existing together peacefully. "Look at what you started," said softly. "With just 2 words, say sorry." "It was not just me," said. "It was all of us. Research, your cultural adaptation, courage to change, willingness to try something new, and most importantly, the students themselves. They did the hard work of changing." "But you were the spark," insisted. "You were brave enough to act when you saw something wrong, even though it could have ended your career, even though you were new and human and had no real authority to challenge culture." Shrugged, "I was a teacher first. Everything else was secondary." Approached them, her large form moving gracefully through the crowd. "Instructor, may I speak with you?" "Of course." She led him slightly away from the others. When they were somewhat private, she did something had never seen her do. She bowed her head low, a gesture of deep respect. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for showing me that I could be a better teacher. For 40 years I thought I was doing right by my students, teaching them strength. But you showed me that strength needs wisdom, that power needs compassion. You did not need me to show you, said gently. You already had that wisdom inside you. You just needed permission to use it. Raised her head and looked at him with her amber eyes. Perhaps, but you gave me that permission. You showed me it was not weakness to change, it was courage. She extended her paw, took it. They shook teacher to teacher, equal to equal. Later that night, sat in his quarters and wrote a message to his family on Earth. He told them about the ceremony, about the monument, about how a simple request for an apology had changed an entire educational institution. I came here thinking I would teach aliens about humans, he wrote, but I have learned just as much from them. I learned that courage looks different in different species, that change is possible even when it seems impossible, that sometimes the smallest act, 2 simple words, can start something much bigger than yourself. He looked out his window at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, home, but here was home too now. Here was where he was making a difference. Not because he was human, not because his way was the only right way, but because he had been willing to stand up for what he believed in, to offer a different perspective, to show that there was more than one path to strength. The next morning walked through the academy hallways to his first class. Students greeted him as he passed. A cub nodded respectfully, a waved enthusiastically, a made their slow gesture of greeting. He entered his classroom. The seats were filled with students from 7 different species. They all quieted when he entered, ready to learn. Good morning, said. Today we are going to discuss ethical decision-making in crisis situations. Let us start with a question. Has anyone here ever had to make a difficult choice between 2 right answers? Hands, paws, claws, and appendages rose throughout the room, students eager to share, eager to learn, eager to grow. Smiled, this was why he taught, not for monuments or recognition, not for changing cultures or making history, but for this, these moments, these students, these opportunities to help young beings become the best versions of themselves. He began the lesson. Outside the window, the stars shone bright. And in that classroom, in that academy, in that small corner of the galaxy, the future was being built one lesson at a time. All because one cub had growled at a teacher, and a human had said, "Say sorry." And everything had changed.